In 1947, a British war crimes tribunal sentenced Albert Kesselring to death. He smiled when they read the verdict. The journalists in the courtroom noted the smile. Several of them wrote about it. None of them could explain it. The sentence was death by shooting. The verdict covered 2 counts. The second count was an order he had signed 3 years earlier. The tribunal had spent weeks on the evidence. The order existed. His signature was on it. The question was what he had known when he signed. Albert Kesselring, Field Marshal, commander of German forces in Italy 1943 to 1945. The man who held the Allied advance for 2 years across some of the worst terrain in Europe. The Allies landed in Sicily in July 1943. They expected Italy to fall quickly. Kesselring made sure it did not. He used the terrain the way few commanders could. Every ridge was a defensive line. Every valley was a killing ground. The Allies paid for every mile. Allied commanders sent assessments to London and Washington describing the difficulty of the Italian campaign. Several of them named Kesselring specifically as the reason. The assessments were not flattering to their own side. They were accurate about his. He was, by enemy acknowledgement, one of the most capable defensive commanders of the war. Rome was declared an open city in 1943. German forces occupied it anyway. By early 1944, the occupation had been running for months. On the afternoon of March 23, 1944, a column of German police troops marched their daily route through the Via Rasella in central Rome. Italian partisans had packed a rubbish cart with explosives. 33 German soldiers were killed. Dozens more were wounded. The report reached German command within hours. Hitler was informed the same evening. His response was immediate and it contained a specific number. 10 Italian civilians for every German soldier killed. That was the order from Hitler. 33 soldiers meant 330 Italians. The order came down through the command chain. It reached Kesselring's headquarters on the morning of March 24. He had options. The trial record documents this. He could have delayed. He could have referred the decision upward. He signed the order the same afternoon it arrived. The order required that the executions be completed within 24 hours. By the time most of Rome knew what had happened, it was already done. The site chosen was a cave complex on the outskirts of Rome, the Ardeatine Caves, used during peacetime to mine pozzolana, a volcanic material for construction. On the afternoon of March 24, 1944, the executions began inside the caves. Groups were brought in. The process took several hours. 335 people were killed. The number exceeded Hitler's original order. The additional 5 were prisoners already scheduled for execution. When the executions were complete, the cave entrance was sealed with explosives. The bodies were left inside. Rome learned what had happened within days. The German command published a notice. It described the operation as a reprisal. It listed no names. The official record described the action as a military necessity, a proportionate response to a terrorist attack. That was the version Kesselring would repeat for the rest of his life. 3 years later, he sat in a courtroom in Venice and explained that he had no choice. The trial record documents what the evidence showed about that claim. Kesselring had started as an artillery officer in the First World War. He transferred to the Luftwaffe in the 1930s when Germany rebuilt its air force in secret. He rose through the Luftwaffe command structure. By 1940, he was directing air operations over Poland, France, and the Battle of Britain. The transformation from air commander to ground commander came in the Mediterranean. He became commander-in-chief south in 1941. He was running air and ground operations simultaneously across North Africa and the Mediterranean. When the Allies landed in Sicily in July 1943, the assumption in London and Washington was that Italy would collapse. Mussolini fell within weeks. The Italian government sued for armistice. Kesselring disagreed with the German generals who wanted to abandon Italy. He argued the peninsula could be defended. He was given command to prove it. The Gustav Line ran across Italy through some of its most difficult terrain. Monte Cassino sat at its center. The Allies threw 4 major offensives at it before it broke. Monte Cassino took 4 months and cost tens of thousands of casualties on both sides. Allied commanders would later say Kesselring had turned a natural obstacle into something close to impregnable. Rome sat behind the lines. The occupation had been running since September 1943. Italian partisan activity had been increasing through the winter. The partisan movement in Rome operated in cells. They had carried out smaller attacks through the winter. The Via Rasella operation on March 23 was the largest and most lethal. 33 soldiers of the Bozen Police Regiment, many of them South Tyroleans, not German nationals, were killed in the attack. The wounded numbered over 60. The German command response was immediate. Reports went up the chain within hours. By evening, Hitler had issued his order, 10 for 1. The order reached Kesselring's headquarters the following morning. His chief of staff received it first. The documentation of what happened next is part of the trial record. The trial testimony establishes that Kesselring was aware of the order's contents before he signed it. The question his defense raised was whether he had any meaningful choice. The prosecution argued he had options. He could have referred the decision to Berlin. He could have requested clarification on the numbers. He could have delayed past the 24-hour window. He did none of those things. The order was signed on the afternoon of March 24. What happened that night in the Ardeatine Caves is documented in Italian judicial records. The Ardeatine Caves were chosen because they were outside the city, isolated, and large enough for what was required. The victims were drawn from Roman prisons and from roundups conducted the morning of March 24. They were not all partisans. Many had no connection to the Via Rasella attack. Italian judicial records document who the victims were: political prisoners, Jewish Romans arrested in the October 1943 roundup and not yet deported, common criminals, people who happened to be in custody. The Italian authorities compiled the list of names after the war, 335. The youngest was 15 years old, the oldest was 74. The executions were carried out in groups inside the cave. SS officers conducted them. The process lasted several hours into the evening of March 24. When it was finished, the entrance was sealed with explosives. The cave was closed. The official record described the operation as completed. Rome knew something had happened. The German notice gave the number but not the names. Families began searching. The cave stayed sealed for months. In his private papers, Kesselring maintained that he had acted within the rules of war, that reprisals were a legal instrument of military occupation, that the partisan attack had forced his hand. His memoir, published in 1953, contains his account of the Ardeatine Caves. It is several pages long. The word apology does not appear. The trial record and the memoir tell the same story from opposite directions. The trial showed what the order said. The memoir explained why it was not his fault. The prosecution put the question directly. Had he known the victims would include people with no connection to the Via Rasella attack? The trial transcript records his answer. He acknowledged the number. He acknowledged his signature. He maintained that the order came from Hitler, and that refusal would have meant his own death. The tribunal considered this argument. They also considered that other German officers in similar positions had refused orders with consequences less severe than execution, that the defense of superior orders had limits. The caves were unsealed after the liberation of Rome in June 1944. Italian authorities entered them. The process of identifying the dead took months. The Ardeatine Caves became a national memorial. The names were carved into the stone, 335 of them. The families of the victims gave testimony at the trial. Some of them were in the courtroom in Venice. The trial record documents what they said. On May 6, 1947, the tribunal found Kesselring guilty on both counts. The sentence was death by shooting. He was 61 years old. He smiled when the sentence was read. The journalists recorded it. Nobody who was there agreed on what the smile meant. Within 2 years of the sentence, a campaign to have it commuted had begun. Some of the men leading it were British. British and American officers signed petitions. Kesselring had been a soldier following orders. His Italian campaign had been militarily legitimate. The reprisal order should be understood in context. The petitions went to the British government. The argument was partly humanitarian, partly political. West Germany was becoming a NATO ally. Prosecuting its former commanders had diplomatic costs. In October 1952, the British government commuted Kesselring's death sentence. The reason given was his age and health. He was 66. He was released. He returned to West Germany. He was received by veterans organizations as a distinguished commander. He attended reunions. He gave speeches. He was introduced as Field Marshal Kesselring, defender of Italy, one of Germany's greatest commanders. His memoir was published in 1953. It was translated into English. It was read at military academies. It contained his account of every major campaign he had commanded. The section on the Ardeatine Caves runs to several pages. It describes the Via Rasella attack. It describes the order. It describes his reasoning. It does not describe the faces of the victims. The word apology does not appear. The names of the dead do not appear. The 15-year-old does not appear. The 74-year-old does not appear. He lived in Bad Nauheim. He had lunch with friends. He corresponded with former officers. He died on July 16, 1960, of heart failure. He was 74 years old. In Rome, the Ardeatine Caves Memorial had been open for 15 years by the time he died. The families of the victims had been going there since it opened. Every year on March 24, a ceremony is held at the caves. The date of the order, the date of the executions, the Italian state attends. The memorial contains the tombs of all 335 victims. They are buried inside the caves where they were killed. Some of the tombs have photographs, men and women in ordinary 1940s clothes, the faces of people who had names and families and were somewhere else the morning of March 24. Kesselring's memoir sold well in West Germany. The memorial received its 100,000th visitor in 1954. The men who signed the petition for his release were not wrong that he had been a skilled commander. The trial record does not dispute his military ability. The trial record does not dispute what happened on March 24, 1944 either. The order existed, the signature existed. 335 people were killed inside the caves. The caves are still there, the names are still on the wall. Kesselring's memoir is still in print. None of those things have changed.